The Secretary General Antonio Guterres said a more united and more effective global response needed to tackle the pandemic. But do you see such a cooperation? Is there enough international collaboration in the world now when it comes to the fight against the COVID-19?
Well, thank you very much for this very crucial question. I think there are three dimensions that we cannot ignore. The first dimension is, as you rightly said, is that this is a major global threat to the whole global community. And second is that, according to the IMF, we are, now going to see significant recession. In fact, the IMF prediction is that this oncoming recession will be worse than the one of the global crisis of 2008. And some are already comparing the recession as worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s in the United States. So these are significant issues we should bear in mind. The third dimension is that what it means is that you need global action. All countries must come together to find solutions. It is not enough for one country response. So under the leadership of the UN Secretary General, how has the UN system tried to promote international action? The first, as you do recall, is that WHO, of course, launched the Strategic Response and Preparedness and Response Plan, which created a set of measures for contingency response by member states, but also building from that to the longer-term response. So every country basically has developed their strategic prevention and response plan, which outlines the measures the countries are going to take, and that's absolutely important. But this measure was also coupled with a solidarity response fund that WHO launched. So this solidarity response fund enables WHO, given the fact that even where a country has money, it may not be able to procure the necessary equipment and accessories that are needed. So WHO then helps to compile and collect resources on a global scale and distribute them in proportion to different countries in the world depending on the need. The second response has been a recognition that there are some countries that are in significant vulnerabilities because of the crisis that they are going through right now. So the Secretary General then launched a humanitarian response plan, which is about $2 billion, as well as a humanitarian response fund. The idea being that these 40 to 50 countries, their health systems are basically devastated or in shambles and may be unable to cope. So this is helping them to be able to address these issues, recognizing the fact that unless you help every country to address it, the risks still continue. And then the final point is the significant socioeconomic impact that the virus is telling on many countries around the world. So if you do remember, a couple of weeks ago, the Secretary General also launched a socioeconomic response plan and had coupled that with their response fund, which is billed at about $1 billion, I'm sorry. And this plan also helps middle and lower income countries to address their responses. So this is where we hope that the global community should be headed. We're not there yet, but I think there's enough consensus among critical members of the international community that this is the way we should be heading.
Speaking of Kyrgyzstan, most parts of Kyrgyzstan are under lockdown since March. The government took many different measures to stop the virus from spreading further. How would you evaluate the efficacy of these measures? How would you assess the Kyrgyz government's response to the coronavirus?
I think we must start by acknowledging that the response in Kyrgyzstan is not different from the response you see in many other countries. And those responses have built from the experience we've had in China, but also from other countries. The first is your ability to find those who may have symptoms for testing, to test them, to isolate those who may have symptoms, to treat them, to trace the contacts, to quarantine the contacts, and so broadly, and then second, to engage in public measures that increase hygiene, but also increase social distancing. This is the track that many countries around the world have walked, and we see with the reduction in numbers from those countries that these measures do work. I think the Kyrgyz government has adopted a set of comprehensive measures as well that follow these tracks. And so I think the fact that, yes, we have a spike in the last 1 week, so now we're about 906 confirmed cases in the country. I think it's fair to argue that if not for the measures that the government has implemented, we could have had a higher rise in numbers in terms of infection rates. So there is no best practice or worst practice. Each country experience is different. Any government can enact any measures. The key is the ability of the public to work with their government to comply. The more you have compliance with those requirements, the better the rates of success. The less they compliant, then you can defeat the whole purpose of what needs to be done. And I think my final point here is to remind people that fighting this pandemic is a marathon. It's not an instant sprint. And all the evidence that's emerging already shows that you may have ebbs and flows. So we have to remember there's a long distance travel we're embarking upon. And we need to continue working with the government on all of those requirements to reduce the infection rates in the country.
I understand the coronavirus pandemic has unraveled health workers' vulnerability around the world, and dozens of medical workers got infected in Kyrgyzstan too, and there was a shortage of protective equipment in the Kyrgyz Republic. How do you think, how well the Kyrgyz doctors were prepared against the COVID-19 pandemic?
I remember that even before the pandemic hit Kyrgyz Republic, my WHO colleague had worked with the Ministry of Health and Government Institutions and other international partners, and in January had led the conduct of assessment of health facilities and ports of entry across the country. They traveled to the country, Manas Airport, Osh Airport, the various border checkpoints, assessed the status of medical facilities, the status of equipment, and produced a comprehensive report. And government has been working on the basis of that report. I think perhaps your viewers and listeners might also acknowledge the fact that recently we hosted a group of experts, Polish doctors, as well as Chinese doctors. And those Polish doctors were invited to help us assess and understand where we're having these high infection rates among health workers. And at the end of their visit, they concluded that the Kyrgyz medical doctors were doing the right things, they were following the right protocol. So there were two issues that we highlighted at one of the reasons why we have this increase in infection rates. One is personal protection equipment. And this is not a problem that's peculiar to Kyrgyz Republic. It's a global problem. No country stocks enough PPEs because no country anticipated that we were going to have this pandemic on such a scale. So most countries will stock a small quantity relative to their health needs. So now we have a shortage of PPEs. So in some cases, you read stories in the media about health personnel having to reuse their PPEs or wash them and wear them again, the face masks and the gloves. So that's one problem. But the bigger problem actually is the fact that when people are going to family medicine centers, and the family medicine centers are not prepared for the pandemic because they are not the designated medical facilities. So people go there for the normal health needs because even though you have a pandemic, people still have other health needs, and it is important to address those health needs. So when people go there and it turns out that they have COVID-19, the health personnel that have processed and attended to them are not wearing protective gear. So actually, the majority of the infection rates we are seeing among health personnel is from family medical centers, not from the designated health facilities for treating COVID-19. And we hope that as more production ramps up around the world of PPEs, that we have more equipment for the medical personnel and that this issue would significantly reduce.
Okay, and let's talk about another angle of the pandemic. The United Nations has recently warned that the coronavirus pandemic was fast becoming a human rights crisis as many governments implement restrictive measures. How dangerous is the human rights situation around the world at this challenging time? For example, did lockdown measures affect the level of democracy or maybe the press freedom in the world?
I think the first point that it's important for everyone to acknowledge is that the threat is the virus. It is not people. So what we need to beat the threat It's a higher level of collaboration and partnership between governments and society. You actually need community mobilization. When you're asking the community to socially distance, you're asking them to stay at home. The community needs to have a certain degree of trust and confidence in those that govern them and in the common enterprise to beat this virus, that then they comply. So I think that's a fundamental point. Now, we also do know that international human rights law recognizes that there may be situations when governments might derogate, from the rights of the people. But it also places limitations on when that should be done. It should be transparent, it should be of a limited duration, and it should be specifically matching the nature of the problem and the responses that are needed. So that is the standard to which we should hold all governments. Now, we know that in some contexts there have been issues, governments in their effort to address these issues are introducing measures and applications that have right of privacy issues and challenges. This is the new frontier in which we are, because in one breath, some of these measures are supposed to help to contain and trace those who may have the virus. But in another breath, there are significant questions about privacy rights, about human rights. How may governments take this to target their political opponents? And I think my final point here would be that governments should recognize the crucial role that the media plays, their right to inform and educate the public. The biggest partner a government can have in the fight against the pandemic in any country is the media. So the more they enable the media to do their job, assist them to move around freely and to report, the better the public sees that the government has nothing to hide. And that can increase public trust and confidence in the government. This is something we've never experienced before. So it requires a different level of engagement between governments and national stakeholders.
Is this the case in Kyrgyzstan? I mean, how freely journalists are working in such a challenging time?
I think the foundation I just laid, that this is something very different that nobody has experienced before. It's an appropriate metaphor for how the state and the media should be working together in Kyrgyzstan. Because in one breath, you might want to implement restrictive measures in the desire to fully control movement of people so you can protect the people from the virus. But in doing so, it's also important to acknowledge the crucial partnerships that should exist. And one of those partnerships should be between the government and the media in Kyrgyzstan and the ability for the media to move around. So when states implement lockdown restrictions that are legitimate responses to the virus, they also should recognize at the same time that the biggest support and the biggest partner is the media. And the ability of the media to move around, but using the protective equipment, the gloves, the masks, the social distancing are crucial for them to report accurately and effectively about what is happening. And my sense is that now there is increasing recognition of that role. And that now I hear government officials also acknowledge the crucial role of the media. So our encouragement as a United Nations system to our government is to deepen this partnership and this collaboration with the media, because you remember, Kuba, that all the analysis now suggests that this virus will not go away. It's going to be with us for quite some time, until at least a vaccine is discovered. So which means that you continue to have spikes and low periods. So the role of the media is even more important now in the public education and the public mobilization for us to effectively respond to this virus.
Another angle of the human rights issues around the world is the domestic violence. The Kyrgyz government confirmed that the number of domestic violence cases have sharply increased in the country during the quarantine. It was reported that the UN and the European Union are helping Kyrgyzstan set up temporary shelters for women and girls who suffered from these kind of situations. How serious or worrying is the situation in Kyrgyzstan when it comes to the domestic violence?
I think that there's a global trend where across the world you're seeing increase in domestic violence across many countries, arising from the forced lockdowns, forced stay at home. So in the Kyrgyz Republic, we have an excellent partnership between the governments, the United Nations system, and the European Union. which began before the virus hit, to support national institutions, but national stakeholders in addressing the issues of domestic violence, but also violence against women generally. And this program had begun last year, 5.8 million euro program together on the implementation. Now we have had to accelerate the implementation of the program to respond specifically to the evidence that's emerging that there's increase in domestic violence from different parts of the country. And so we, together with government and the European Union, yes, we set up some safe spaces, because the crisis centers, there was a challenge about how the crisis centers that exist can respond. And unfortunately, most of them don't have personal protection equipment. The spaces are very small. You can only take about one person at a time. So how do you make them to adapt to the WHO guidelines on personal hygiene and social distancing? So this is an interim measure where the crisis centers reorganize and replan to be able to address with this issue, but also to provide support for hotlines. So anybody who is a victim or anybody who has witnessed such a case can call the hotline and ask for support, to have the police and law enforcement quickly deploy and arrest this situation and take the victim to safety, but also to arrest the perpetrator. The biggest challenge we find in our Kyrgyz society is that even where somebody is arrested, very shortly the family comes together and they start pleading for the person. And then you have the victim now pleading on social media, on television, saying, please leave my husband alone because he's the breadwinner. Yes. And therefore, if he's detained, there's nothing I can do. So we are also engaging in significant public education, not just for the women, but also for the men, that the women are crucial and we need the men to stand up and to champion the rights of women to address this issue. So we might not resolve this, the dependency of this crisis, but I think there's a lot of work that's happening, and I want to commend the leadership of government in recognizing that this is a problem and in deploying the capacity of institutions to address this issue.
And as it was mentioned earlier, the UN has been providing with some help to Kyrgyzstan through its different institutions to fight the COVID-19. Would you mind elaborating more on this topic? What concrete cooperation does the UN have currently with Kyrgyzstan in these regards?
Well, you remember that the first priority is the health response, because this is a health crisis of unimaginable proportions. So under the leadership of WHO, we convened various stakeholders, international, national, and government, and very quickly in early March developed the contingency plan, which enabled the government to begin early to procure PPEs, reagents, testing kits, and other equipment, but also to prepare the health facilities to address this issue. Second is that we have what we call the Disaster Response Coordination Unit. This is a mechanism for responding to emergencies or potential disasters that impact the capacity of government and its institutions to respond. So also early in March, the Vice Prime Minister wrote me an official letter and said, I need you as Resident Coordinator to reactivate this mechanism. We need support, we need help to plan for our response. And so this mechanism operates in 8 sectors. We collapse it to 6 sectors. So the first sector is the health response. So we took that contingency plan and now it's been elaborated into a recovery plan, health recovery plan as well. So in spite of COVID-19, it's looking also into the medium to long term. What would the health facilities look like? How do we plan for the next pandemic to ensure that the country is able to respond much better? But then you're looking at issues of food security.
Yes.
Potential numbers that have lost their jobs, that are food insecure, they live on a day-to-day basis and they can't go out to find food. How do you address the security, but also the logistics question? Education. You have children who are out of school now. How do they continue learning so that they don't lose out on school? Water and sanitation. Even in communities that are in lockdown, that are impacted, even in health facilities where people are detained or quarantined, how do you ensure that there's sufficient water and sanitation facilities that you don't exacerbate the problem? Then issues of protection for migrants or refugees, for children, also for women, from violence, but also on their rights. And then the question of early recovery. How do we recover as a people and as a system? So both socially, but economically, so that the basis for economic activity can be picked up again. So we developed this plan in consultation with national authorities, submitted it to government because now it's a government's plan, and we're helping government to implement them. But broadly also, as resident coordinator for the UN, I'm the co-chair of the Development Partners Coordination Council. So that's a second platform where all the UN agencies are active with other development partners, and we're supporting government in thinking through the anti-crisis plan. So what is the stimulus package that could help to restart the economy? And what is the offer from development partners in this regard? So there's a whole comprehensive range of efforts and approaches that are being brought to bear to support the national authorities in their response to COVID-19.
Is the Kyrgyz government listening to your recommendations, suggestions? How responsive is the Kyrgyz government?
In all the planning meetings of the Disaster Response Coordination Unit, we've had government participation sometimes at the highest levels. When we validated the plan, I went to the offices of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, and together with the State Secretary, we had all the key ministries calling. Those who called in were either the ministers or the deputy ministers for each of these 6 sectors that I mentioned, and each of them responded to the degree of consultation that took place between them and the UN agencies and validated the plan. So you can say that there's significant consultation going on. Now, on what government calls the anti-crisis plan, there's been 2 to 3 dialogues, meetings between government and development partners. Mm-hmm. There's certainly a wish that there could be much more detailed dialogue on all of the key elements of the plan. But you also must respect the fact that at the end of the day, there is a government, it makes the decisions, it probably has more information than any other person within the development community in the country, and to make a final decision on what is appropriate. What I would like to encourage is that it's important to take all of these plans as one comprehensive package. The response on the emergency situation, you cannot take it outside the national agenda for how you rebuild and reconstruct your society. Mm-hmm. It is fundamental because it shows an investment in the people. An mm-hmm. investment in the people should come first before an investment in economic recovery. Because when the people recover, the economy recovers. So this kind of investment must be anchored in the financing package that the government has put together for the response. It cannot be put separate from a national response where you expect donors to fund mm-hmm. Issues around the education, the health, the sanitation, the food security of the people. It has to be ingrained into the national plan. And then and across the country, across the world, you see that many governments are enacting different packages for their people who are in lockdown and who need help. All governments are doing that. So we should not be different as a Kyrgyz Republic.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the food security. Recently, the UN's Food Relief Agency has said that the world is facing widespread famine of biblical proportions, even because of the COVID-19. What is ahead of the world when it comes to the food safety, and what should the countries to do to prevent such a situation from happening?
It is certainly a grim situation because you see, if you take in many countries, we hope that they might not lose their agricultural season. So if you take the example of Kyrgyz Republic, I think one of the factors that government has taken into consideration in easing some of the restrictions is to enable farmers to go back to the farms to plant before the full rains come, so that we can have a harvest in 2020. So imagine a country where perhaps the situation is so severe that farmers can't go and farm. So you might lose one whole seasonal harvest. And then it's because of the lockdown, companies have closed down, so there's no production, so there's no distribution of food. And then because of the lockdown, shipment of goods around the world, agricultural goods, food in the stores in some countries, there's some shortage. And then even when it's available, people may not have money to buy. So this is the significant problem we see. So which is why it requires a global partnership, to address this issue. So if you take the case of Central Asia, for example, where we're mostly landlocked countries, it requires a different kind of recognition of the interdependency we have with each other, and the establishment of green corridors, for example, green corridors that allow the movement of essential goods, but also essential medicines and essential medical equipment. It allows for the sharing of new experience, but also efforts to support institutions like WFP that engage in food distribution to make sure that it reaches those who are most in need, because there are those who are already impacted by this situation. They live on a day-to-day basis, so they have no income. So how are they going to feed their families? So it's important to make sure that in the meantime, we are providing food relief, food assistance for them to be able to feed, while at the same time, as the easing begins to take place, that food production can pick up, that agriculture can pick up, but that you have green corridors that allow the movement of foods around the world. So it's going to be a major challenging situation around the world, and I do hope that in Central Asia, that our governments are looking at these issues and finding new ways of cooperating and working together to address the fundamental threats to the existence of the peoples of this region.
Yeah, you said that you've just said that the help should reach its targets, yeah? And some international organizations, including the International Monetary Fund, are allocating certain amount of financial support money to developing countries like Kyrgyzstan. At the same time, non-governmental organizations are concerned that this money could be wrongly used, even in Kyrgyzstan. And what should be done to make such support reach its targets? How to maintain transparency in spending this international help or money which was allocated by international organizations?
I think that's a crucial question, and I think the starting point is our recognition that in any society or any country where the institutions of the state or oversight institutions are not particularly strong, then there's a risk of leakages, which then means that you also need to find ways of working together to demonstrate that those leakages are minimized, if not completely eliminated. And given the risks that COVID-19 has imposed on all of us, it cannot be business as usual with everyone. Governments need their publics to trust them, to believe that they work in the public, best interest. So for them to get to listen to the government when you ask them to engage in social distancing, in personal hygiene, and all of those kinds of issues. So in such societies, what is important is first, it's important for governments to continuously publish both the budget but also the expenditure. And I think in the context of monies that Kyrgyz Republic is receiving, I think I must acknowledge the fact that they publish all the contributions in the government website. So this needs to happen on a regular basis, not just on what you've received, but also on what you've spent and what you spent it on, because that allows society to make a direct connection between the receipts, but also where the money is going. You also need a different kind of partnership with civil society. Civil society needs to be able to track and monitor, expenditure in the budget, and to conduct analysis of that expenditure, and to share that analysis. And then you need the media as your key partner to work with you. And if there are then gaps in the oversight regime, it's important to strengthen the oversight institutions in their oversight role of government, institutions. So you take the parliament, for example. The parliament should be able to understand budgeting processes and to question members of the executive on how they're spending their money. All of this can contribute to increasing confidence in the state and in the ability of the state to respond. So in the Kyrgyz Republic, I think this is the kind of issue that requires stronger dialogue between government and civil society, because we all invested in the society. Civil society is just as committed to the country as those in government. And you see that in the way that people rose up voluntarily to contribute money, to contribute food towards the COVID-19 response. So nobody is more patriotic than the other. It requires a recognition of the interdependency and the mutual partnership that should exist to deepen the accountability of those who govern.
Some international help or financial support have already arrived in Kyrgyzstan. Are you satisfied with how the government is spending this money, or is going to spend?
We've had a number of consultations with government on what the needs are. The projections are that in terms of the budget, there's going to be close to about $500 million gap in the national budget for this year. So a lot of the commitments that have been made are to address those gaps. So there's a first immediate disbursement of $120 million from IMF, and I think there's a second disbursement of about similar amount that IMF is granted to the government. There are a number of international financial institutions have also pledged some credit lines to the government. And if you add all of that, it gives you something close to $400 to $470 million. So it's important to remember that the budget of government also includes the maintenance of the state and its institutions and the delivery of service. So you see the health response, for example, that's taking place. The government has paid for the health response for all those who are affected. All of that must come from the budget. So there's some legitimate need that needs to be covered from the budget. Now, but then you have the the emergency response in terms of ensuring that packages reach those who are most in need, the newly unemployed. Some of the projections are that about 1.8 million people in this country will be needing food assistance. That's more than a quarter of our population. So there's got to be money found for that. And then you have the broader need for restarting the economy. And the projections by government is that this socio-economic response will be in the neighborhood of $600 to $700 million. There's no indication yet where this money is going to come from. And even for the donor partners, most of the donor partners, because their home countries are also affected, and in some cases more affected than in Kyrgyzstan, none of the donor partners is actually talking about giving new money. The discussion is only about repurposing the existing commitments that they have in Kyrgyzstan, which means that this $600 to $700 million will be nowhere near meeting it, not even 1/5 or 1/6. So what does it require? It does then require a different kind of conversation between the state and the citizen. Because if the state is unable to deliver on certain services, the citizen needs to have the confidence that it's unable to deliver, not because the money has been siphoned, but just because that the money is not there. And that together as a country, we have a conversation about how we will work together, what are the priority areas for any money that comes in, so the money is applied to those priority areas, and how new money will be applied. That's the end of the conversation.
Do you see such a conversation between the government and the public in Kyrgyzstan? I mean,
I know that the government has been asking for feedback on its anti-crisis plan from different sectors. I know that the private sector made a contribution. What I would say is that I certainly would want to encourage, I want to encourage deeper consultation and deeper conversations on these kinds of issues. The public is not stupid. They might not be economists, but everybody feels the economy in their pocket. Everybody feels the impact of the economy in their society. Everybody has a sense of fair and what is right and what needs to be done. So when we speak to people as adults and trust their judgment capacity, and they elicit their inputs on this is what we have, these are our needs. Our needs are so much more than what we have. Where should our priorities lie? What should we be doing together? And how would you want to be satisfied that all of this is being done? Every society that goes through that route of building this kind of strong partnership with its constituents always comes out the better for it, because people get quickly mobilized and volunteer their time as well as their resources to make their society better.
So, speaking of the economy of the Kyrgyz Republic, the International Monetary Fund is forecasting that the Kyrgyz economy would fall by 4% this year. The country is too dependent on remittances from migrants. So you've already elaborated, expressed your opinion on how to kind of save the country's economy. Yes, what else should be done to kind of save the Kyrgyz economy from, very bad situations or forecasts?
Well, I think we started by recognizing that there's going to be a global recession. So this is almost like inevitable that there's going to be impact. A lot depends on how well we contain the spread of the virus, because that also then determines on how quickly economic activities can be restarted and people can begin to engage in productive activities that allows them to then pay tax to government at the end of the year. So herein lies the risk, because in one breath you want to open up the economy so people can pick up the pieces of their lives and engage in economic activities, but you also want to protect the public from this health pandemic. So what is the evidence that's emerging? The evidence that's emerging is that the easement of restriction that we have seen in the last 1 week, more and more people are hitting the streets, almost like people are so frustrated sitting at home. Everyone's eager to go out onto the streets, and they're going out with even small children. The risk in this behavior is that you have the risk for higher reinfection rates. So it's almost like has a risk of defeating the gains that we have made, which then means that a full return to normalcy is postponed. So it's important for people to listen to what the Ministry of Health and what the government is saying. People should not go out unless it is absolutely necessary. And for the sectors of the economy that are reopening, to observe full sanitary and full hygiene conditions, because by doing so, we minimize the risk of infection, but then it allows economic activity to keep humming and keep improving. And so we can contain coronavirus even as the economy is picking up pace. So they can go pari passu. But the way people are trooping onto the streets creates significant challenge. So my point then is, unless we work together with the government in ensuring the social distancing, in the personal hygiene, recovery will take longer. And if recovery takes longer, the impact on the economy will be more. So we might actually have a higher impact than has been projected by IMF. So they need to go together. And some people still think that it's a joke. I'm sure you've seen it on social media. There's something that this is still a joke, that is not serious, it's going to go away, and it will not go away. So we need this partnership with the government to make this work for the people of the country.
Okay. Here, I would like to go back to the first question regarding the UN's call on the global world countries to work together, yes? At the same time, the UN's bodies or institutions are being criticized in certain countries. For example, as we all know, the US President Donald Trump criticized the World Health Organization's response to the pandemic. And of course, other world leaders immediately condemned Trump's statement. Yet, what lessons could the UN extract out of this crisis? How well did the organization fulfill its role in the face of the pandemic?
I think the fundamental recognition that is still there is the crucial role of an institution like WHO when you have a global pandemic. That is not something a health institution at the national level alone can address. You need a global health institution to mobilize global opinion, global capacities, make available science, make available solutions and innovation to address them, mobilize the best scientists and thinkers around the world to begin to work on issues like vaccines, now to do solidarity trials, working with many countries on how we can learn the lessons and quickly find a response. And to do this with humility and respect for member states and what they bring to the table. And so this has been a big lesson for all of us as a global community, but also for the United Nations system. The priority right now is actually to address the virus and its implications because it hasn't gone away. So we need the mobilization of the global community, but we also need the financing that WHO needs to do this. If you look at the Global Solidarity Fund, through that fund, WHO is assisting countries like the Kyrgyzstan Republic and the others to find crucial PPEs, medicines, and equipment to address these challenges. And we can't stop, because if we stop, it means that countries around the world may never be able to address them. Now, when we have fully addressed COVID-19, it's important for the global community, but also for the UN, including WHO, you do what you call an after-action review, right? So what lessons have we learned from this? What did we do well as a UN, well as a global community, but also well as a member state at the national level? Okay. And what should we do differently to anticipate the next crisis? So we should come at it with an open mind to address the current problem and be ready to reflect on the experience we've learned, and to use that to plan for preventing future pandemics.
Okay. At the end, Mr. Ojielo, I want to talk about your experience in Kyrgyzstan. It's been more than 2 years since you started working in the Kyrgyz Republic. Obviously, you have worked in many countries before that. Kyrgyzstan presents itself as a country which wants to build a democratic society. Yet the country is relatively poorer than many countries in the world. What do you think should be developed and nurtured in Kyrgyzstan in order to achieve those aims, purposes?
First of all, is to confess that I've had fantastic 28, almost 30 months in the country. You know, I've traveled to all the 7 oblasts. I've met people, civil society, community members, local administrators, you know, national level politicians. It's an amazing society. Mm-hmm. It is on a journey. And, you know, journey for each country, every country creates its own pathway. So the Kyrgyzstani pathway will be different from that of another country. And what is important is the national consensus and the national ethos about where this country wants to go. And I think the national ethos is clear, reflected in the constitution, the constitution of that midwife to the new democracy in 2011, that we want to be an open parliamentary democracy. Now, the journey to democracy and the journey to parliament is not instant coffee. There will be ups and downs. The key is learning the right lessons and strengthening, you know, the capacities and plugging the gap areas. It has a vibrant young population that is innovative. So for me, it's a wonderful place to work here. We need to strengthen the partnership between the state and non-state actors and civil society. And we should not be looking at our region as the example of how to go. We should be looking at the society we want to create in Kyrgyzstan. And based on that national desire, create what works for the Kyrgyz Republic. But you know, I say to people, Kyrgyzstan is still a country in transition. The first transition of power from an elected president to another happened only in 2017. Post the revolution, from an elected president to another president, we only had one transition. So while we keep our ambitions high, we also should keep our realism and work with enthusiasm to build that kind of country. So people should not be disappointed if they haven't had the kind of progress that they see. What I would rather say is, let's keep working focused, looking to the future. Let's not be distracted or feel undermined by the challenges that we see. There are enough elements in the country, within the government, within the society, in private sector that share this vision of an open, pluralistic, democratic society. That's the coalition that we need in this country to keep the journey to democracy going ahead. And I've had an amazing period, and I love my stay in this country. I've made many friends as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hope we will have furthermore interviews with you in the future. We wish you all the best. Thank you very much once